Hey, in this video I'm going to talk about the jhanas, which are the meditative states that they describe in a lot of different meditative practices. The main one I've learned it from is Buddhism, but I want to say every like religion and spiritual lineage that comes out of India and that general area has a very similar concept, if not the exact same thing. Where like in the jhana is the Pali word, which is the main language of Buddhism, but in yoga and I assume in Hinduism as well, they would use the Sanskrit word of jhana, like a D instead of a J. That's not too important, but these are essentially something that people have experienced over long periods of time, and it's almost like a universal result of meditation. That when you concentrate your mind, very deeply, it's like certain processes in your mind gradually fade away and become silent, and other like deeper processes come to the surface and become the main thing that you're experiencing. So, if you think about it in terms of like normal consciousness is like the base level. Whereas, in kind of loud. In normal consciousness, I'll just wait a second for that. Yeah, in normal consciousness, you experience the mind wandering and moving from one thought to the other. You think of it as like the internal monologue, where there's like a constant story going on in your head, like a narration. Or you just think of it in terms of, like, you're looking at something and you're, working, and then you get distracted by something that's more interesting, or get distracted by something that you want to do later, or that you happened in the past and you want to think about that. And those are the things that, through meditation, you kind of gradually move out of that state of consciousness. And when you get to kind of like the very beginning level of concentration, you're in essentially a form of the first jhana. And it's very complicated because the jhanas aren't as simple as just being in the meditative state or out of the meditative state. And on some level, obviously it is like when you're not in the meditative state, and when you're in it, But being in the meditative state there's a huge range from being at the very surface level of it, where your mind is quiet for a moment and your body starts to feel, the characteristic way that you feel during one of these experiences. But you can go from that surface level to, as far as I'm concerned, it's like an infinitely deep, well of, like a well of experience of, concentrated mind. Whereas like the deeper and deeper you go into it, the more intense the sensations are, but more importantly, the more focused your mind becomes. And it's not just about how narrow your focus is, it's also about how stable it is. And that's the main thing that changes from, surface level jhana to the deeper states of they call it like absorption concentration, where your mind is like so absorbed on the topic, on the thing you're staring at, on the breath, on your mantra, whatever it is you're using to meditate. Your mind is so focused that you're like, even there's like stories of people who there'll be things going on around them, like a car driving by or something, and they just won't even hear it because their mind is so concentrated that they're like completely cut off from the world around them. Which I think is arguably going too deep into the state of concentration, especially if you're like next to a road with a car. Obviously, you don't want to be that deeply concentrated. And actually, the surface level meditative state is actually a better state to be in when you might have to respond to something going on around you. But when you're, a monk meditating, or when you're on like a silent retreat, you can get into these deep states of concentration where essentially the entire world around you fades away, and your whole mind becomes quiet and tranquil, and becomes just purely concentrated on, whatever you're concentrating on. And yeah, I think that's essentially the introduction of just how these things look, because I'm going to go on to describing what each of the jhanas is, but I think it's important to understand that what I'm describing is something that you can't experience. It's like you have to be deeply meditating to really experience these things. So what I'm talking about is just like a vague memory of what I've experienced in the past. And, in full like personal honesty, I have access to these states if I am like very focused and meditating for like an hour or so. But this is always something that, like, until you get to like the really, really like advanced states of meditation, these are always going to be something that you have to kind of work to get towards. You have to put some energy into getting into the state, even though once you get to the state, it's fairly stable and pleasant. But it's not something that you necessarily get too easily. Like it takes work and takes dedication and study and things like that. But yeah. So the jhanas are described, or they're described based on what is present in the mind during the jhana experience. And these are called the jhana factors. And the first four jhanas, so there's 8 total. Excuse me. There's 8 jhanas total, where the first 4 are kind of like the classical. They're kind of like the main practice of Buddhism is done in the first 4 jhanas, and the next 4 are higher states of concentration, but they're something called the immaterial states. They're the immaterial jhanas, where it's essentially once you get from the 4th jhana to, so you can say the 5th jhana or the first immaterial state, you essentially lose awareness of your body, and it allows your mind to become even more concentrated. But the loss of awareness of your body takes away a certain quality of the meditation that is very important for purifying yourself and bringing these things into your actual life. So I think I'm going to mostly talk about the material jhanas, the kind of just like the classical 4 jhanas, because those are the thing that I mostly practice. And as far as I know, it's like what the Buddha was talking about mostly, whereas he would talk about the immaterial states but wouldn't emphasize them very much. So yeah, the first classical jhana is, so the way it works is that the first jhana has all of the jhana factors present in it. And so I'll just go ahead and list them. They're applied thought and sustained thought. That's like the kind of a combined factor, but it's 2 different things. So you have the 2 types of thought, and then you have 2 types of pleasant sensation. One of them is called rapture or zest, and it's kind of like it's very hard to describe. It's kind of like a sparkly feeling almost, like it's kind of like sand. There's like sparks of a metal. Like if you see someone like sharpening like a metal sword or something like that, I don't know, like doing something with metal, and you see the sparks flying off of it, that's kind of the feeling of the rapture occurring within your body. Whereas the other type of pleasure is called bliss. It's translated as bliss or joy, and that's much more of a kind of an upwelling of almost like sunlight. It feels just like a light, like an optical light sensation. But it doesn't actually come with like a you don't see the thing happening. You sort of just feel it in your body and in your mind. And the key distinction between rapture and bliss is that if you're trying to understand them without experiencing them yet, it's you can think of rapture as being fully bodily, like fully a part of your body that you're experiencing, whereas the bliss it's a bodily sensation, but it feels much more like it's happening in your mind. And kind of getting into the progression of the jhanas, the bliss is a kind of a more pure form of pleasure because it's much less contained by the qualities of like the cells and the things like the physical instincts. It's more of just a joy of the mind rather than a pleasure of the body. But yeah, very hard to stay focused on this type of thing. So yeah, you have the two types of thought, two types of pleasurable sensation, and the next jhana factor is equanimity, which is pretty simple. It's essentially the feeling that you're just okay with like what you're experiencing. Like you don't feel strongly one way or the other. And the equanimity isn't very noticeable on the lower jhanas because all these feelings of bliss and pleasure are around. So if you're not like fully in the jhana state, you actually don't have a lot of equanimity, and you're more in a kind of a state of happiness, in a state of like call it like rejoicing and being glad of what's happening. But as you get into the higher jhanas, the experience becomes gradually more equanimous and more dominated by neutral feelings rather than pleasurable feelings. And so there's another jhana factor they sometimes add, which is single pointedness, which essentially means concentration. Like your mind is concentrated on a single point. But you could argue that the really surface level jhana doesn't actually have single pointedness because you can still be kind of in the wandering mind state in like 10% of your mind, 20% of your mind, and have the rest of your mind be in jhana, in that concentrated blissful state. And I think a lot of people would say that is still the jhana, at least on the lighter level of what a jhana is. But when you get into like the true, like pure concentration states, then you get that single pointedness where the mind is only concentrated on the object of meditation and there's nothing else going on. But yeah, so the first jhana, basically everything I've just described is all present within the first jhana. And if you're like how much depth there is to each of these things, the first jhana has a lot of stuff going on. And that makes it useful. I've been sitting on an uncomfortable root for a while. The first jhana has so much stuff going on that it isn't an extremely stable state, but it is very useful for doing contemplation and analyzing things. But once you go from the first jhana to the second jhana, which I want to say is kind of the biggest jump, like going from base consciousness to the first jhana is the biggest step. And the next biggest step is going from the first to the second. And after that, it becomes easier because the second jhana, compared to the first jhana, is very stable feeling. And the jhana factors present in it are the rapture and bliss and equanimity. But Lord, too close to the airport. But in the second jhana, you drop the two forms of thought. So your mind isn't, it's not thinking at all. But even deeper than that, it's not trying to concentrate. Because in the first jhana, you might be very concentrated on the breath or on the object of meditation, but there's a certain part of your mind that is still trying to meditate, and it's still like bringing things towards the object. But once you get into the second jhana, and actually the way to get to the second jhana is to stabilize the mind enough that those forms of thought aren't necessary anymore, and your mind just concentrates on the object without needing any additional force bringing it towards it. And that actually adds, I'm remembering now, it adds another factor to the second jhana. So it has the rapture and bliss and equanimity, but it also has, I'm trying to think of the word they use. It's essentially like, yes, internal confidence is the word. And the internal confidence is essentially a feeling that you know you're there, you know you're in the state, and you're still able to be distracted. Like, it's not a purely stable concentration state, but it is a state where you feel so much more stable and so much more still, where it's hard to describe, but I guess that suffice to say that it's getting to the second jhana is a very, very it's definitely an achievement, because once you get there, you have kind of opened the door to the rest of the experiences that you can have. Because going from the second jhana to the third is, it's a much more minor shift, where you only drop the rapture, and then you get into a state where you're only feeling like the blissful joy, as well as equanimity, and they describe it as being it's like perfection of mindfulness, where you reach a very mindful state, and your body feels very clear and very, very bright, and it's still full of this kind of fuzzy, soft feeling that is described as the joy, the bliss, but you're starting to get into the state of being more equanimous and more neutral feeling, where they describe it as like a equanimity bliss, as like a single word, because if the rapture in the second jhana and the first jhana is like a joyful, like, celebration feeling, even if that is rooted in equanimity, where there's a part of you that is still feeling neutral about it, it's still closer to the worldly pleasures. And it's not this is getting too deep into the rabbit hole, I guess, but the joy that you feel in the third jhana, where it's joy separated from rapture, becomes way more pure and way more, just like kind of boundless feeling. And it feels like something that you don't feel too much attachment to. And the jhanas, it's kind of as you ascend into the jhanas, like from one to the next, you essentially are experiencing things that are easier to let go of, and they feel lighter and they're more profound and more all-encompassing, but they're less intense and less material, in a way that it feels easier and easier to keep going further into the jhanas. And yeah, so the final material jhana, which is the fourth jhana, is a state where there's no pleasure at all, and it's just pure neutral feeling. And there's like the verbose version is the feeling of neither pain nor pleasure. And it sounds kind of arcane almost, that you're feeling something and it's not pain and it's not pleasure. But it's not actually that complicated, because it's essentially just being neutral and kind of just not caring about what's going on. But because of that being the dominant thing in your experience, while you're also highly concentrated on something, it gives you almost an imperturbable, it's a word they use, an almost imperturbable state of concentration, where if you're fully in that state, there's essentially nothing that can pull you out of it, because anything that you experience, that maybe your eyes are closed but you hear something, or I don't know, your body starts getting cold or hot or something, those things just don't really matter to you, because you're so neutral about how you feel about things, and so focused on like what you're doing, what you're meditating on. It's just like nothing else really matters. And it's like nothing matters at all, essentially. Whereas in the lower jhanas, you feel joy and you feel pleasure. So those things, they do weigh on your mind a little bit. Where, because there's very pleasant things and very positive experiences, the weight they have on your mind is a pleasant thing. It's like a weighted blanket. But in the fourth jhana, the experience is so neutral that in a way it hardly feels like you're even meditating anymore. And it's like your mind is purely concentrated, and you're just in a state of pure neutral feeling, where you just, that's essentially like yeah, grounding it back in the actual practice that you would do, that's kind of where you stay when you're doing the gradual work of meditation. And the lower jhanas they're very useful, and they're very effective for purifying your mind in the initiating initial stages. But the fourth jhana is really where you want to reside, essentially. Like if you're meditating at like a silent retreat or something, and it's obviously very complicated. There's many different practices you can do with these things, but the really like the bread and butter technique of classic Buddhism, at least from my perspective, is to stay in the fourth jhana for long periods of time, and to use that like equanimous, bright mind state to just kind of see everything around you, to see everything within yourself, and to just be okay with it, and be okay with seeing more of it, and be okay with seeing things that you might have been ignoring, might have been wanting to not see, and yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good description of the material jhanas. And yeah, I hope I'm not rambling too much. These are hard things to talk about because you have to really be in the state to really know what it's like. And I think I already said this, but I'm just kind of talking from memory and just talking from my like mental model of how these things are. And yeah, I think I'll just continue on to talking about the immaterial states, because I think I've said most of what I want to say about the material jhanas. But the transition from the fourth jhana to what I prefer to call the first material state, there's definitely people that say the fourth jhana and then the fifth jhana, with the fifth jhana being the first immaterial state. But I think it's a little unclear to talk like that because the immaterial states really are a different thing. And I think it's, in terms of the jhana factors, like the first four jhanas are divided by the factors that are present in them. But the immaterial states have all only the factor of equanimity, as well as the single pointedness that's present in any jhana, in like the deeper forms of it. But because it has the same factors as the fourth jhana, it's more or less valid to say that the immaterial states are just different forms of the fourth jhana. And they're essentially the fourth jhana without awareness of the body. Because throughout the first four jhanas, you're very aware of the body. And the kind of the classical description of like a true jhana state, like what was given by the Buddha, describes that every part of your body is suffused with the feelings, like the pleasure, the equanimity. And I think that is like the proper like deep state of jhana is where your entire body is within your awareness. And it's a very distinct feeling when you feel it, going from the state of being aware of most of your body to being aware of all of it. It's a pretty extreme shift if you ever experience it. And going from that to the immaterial states is essentially like your body becomes so quiet and so still that there is nothing to be experienced within it. And so while the fourth jhana has feelings within the body, but they're very neutral, the first immaterial state has no feelings within the body at all. And it's not the sort of thing where you wouldn't feel something in your body. Like at least in my experience, if like there's something, if something touches you, or if your leg starts hurting, even if you're in the immaterial states, you'll still feel that, and it kind of brings you back, especially back into a material state of mind. But in the pure, stable states, you essentially are having an experience, like a momentary experience of being a mind without a body. And so all of these states are characterized by being boundless and being, they're described as being infinite, which the infinity of it is less of a reality of, it's not like you're experiencing infinite things when you're in these states. It's more you're experiencing like the feeling of things being without boundaries and without a finite, without anything finite. It's like a very, very literal form of infinite. But I think it's more clear to talk about these being boundless states. So the first one is the state of boundless space. And it essentially feels like you're just floating in just kind of like an outer space. And the characteristic of these things is that there's no real like visual experience to it. And there's no real even like conceptual experience that you're supposed to be having. But it is very useful to consider yourself just like floating in space in like a field of stars, that type of thing. But once you actually get into the state, it's essentially just like a black space that goes on forever. And so yeah, that's the first immaterial state. And moving on to the second one, it's essentially the same state, but instead of perceiving it as being space, you perceive it as being consciousness. So you're in a state of boundless consciousness where you feel as though consciousness itself has lost its boundaries, and it's like everything in the universe, from your perspective, is a single consciousness. And I think in a lot of ways this is the source of like a whole bunch of different religions, and even some Indian stuff. They talk about like the mind of the world, or like the great consciousness, the things of that idea. Not in those words necessarily, but it's a state where you can kind of fall into thinking that you are God, or like this is what God feels like, or like this is where God resides. You know, those types of ideas. And I think that's part of why the immaterial states are less useful for meditation, because they can kind of lead to weird ideas like that. Because you're in a state where you're completely disconnected from the physical world, and there's less things to ground you in the actual experiences that counteract those types of ideas. But for the purpose of describing it, I think it is very useful to include that type of stuff, because these are very like godlike feelings if you have some imagination of what it feels like to be that type of being. But so moving on from that to the next immaterial state is the state of nothingness. You could say boundless nothingness, but it's essentially just the experience that there is nothing at all. And the description in the suttas, like the Buddhist texts, is kind of funny, because they essentially say, like, the meditator realizes there is nothing. And this gets into the idea of emptiness. They talk about in a lot of Zen Buddhism and similar like East Asian Buddhism, where you see the emptiness of everything, and you see that boundless consciousness that you were observing, that you felt like you were a part of, was actually containing nothing. And there actually is no experience happening anywhere at all. And it's just pure nothingness, pure peaceful quiet. And that, on some level, is like the final normal state of awareness you can be in. Because obviously going from normal consciousness to the jhanas is like a one step into like a purified state of mind. Then going from the form jhanas to the immaterial jhanas is dropping awareness of the body and going into a purely mental state that's very concentrated and very empty. And the state of nothingness is kind of like the peak of that emptiness and that quietness. But there's actually a state beyond that, which is the fourth immaterial state. And the description of it is very basic, because the name of it is the state of neither perception nor non-perception. And it's a very strange state of mind, because it's like the mind is so simplified and so inactive that you essentially have you have so little experience going on that there's nothing to actually describe. And it's so hard to talk about because it's beyond nothingness, and it's like the nothingness is only perceptible because there's some process going on that has a memory of there being something. But it's like this state of mind it's a transcendent of that perception, where there's not, it's like the perception of nothingness as well as the perception of like things, of something. Neither of those perceptions go away completely, but instead they kind of merge. This is kind of my interpretation, that they merge into a state where there is, like, there's no perception going on, because the state of, the process of perception, which is continuously occurring, has nothing to perceive. But you're not in a state of no perception, because even though there's nothing being perceived, there is still that lingering existence of perception itself. And and yeah, there's not really much to say about it even. I mean, it's something that you just can't really describe. Like, the jhanas are hard to describe enough as it is, but yeah, you can essentially think of it as like, that's just like the highest state you can be in, and the most concentrated your mind can be, but it's almost going too far into it on some level. And I don't do much of the immaterial state practice, but I kind of get the sense that the nothingness state is more useful in a way, because it maintains more of your mind and more of your, just like more of what you bring into it, whereas the state of neither perception nor non-perception is so simplified and so blank almost, that yeah, it almost feels like your mind is like too turned off and like too inactive, that I don't know, when I first heard about these things I almost thought it was like a dangerous state to be in, because like your mind is like almost dead. And I think people describe like being in that state for a long time, it allows you to meditate for long periods, because your mind and your body are essentially asleep. But it's, in my experience, a little uncomfortable to be in that state, just because of how asleep you feel. But I don't know. That's just my own take on it. And this video is pretty long already. I won't say too much more about it, but I guess while I'm talking about the states of meditation, I'll leave this topic for another video. There is a state beyond the neither perception or non-perception, which is called the cessation of perception and feeling, which is kind of synonymous with nirvana, and like liberation, moksha, vimutti. There's a bunch of different words for it. But that's not actually one of the jhanas, even though it the description of it makes it sound like a similar state of mind. But I'm not going to talk about it in this video, because it is something very different. Because jhana, the main characteristic of jhana, as I was saying earlier, is the single-pointedness and the concentration on an object. But the cessation of perception and feeling is the complete void of like no object at all, and there's not even consciousness, which it like having that experience doesn't end your stream of consciousness. Like, you don't die, but it does, like, it's a complete paradox where consciousness ends for a moment, and it's like the entire universe pauses. And no matter how deep you are into jhana, like, time is still going on, and there's still, like, the universe around you is still there. But yeah, the experience outside of jhana is something else entirely. But yeah, this has gone on long enough, I think. I'll give a quick summary. So, jhanas are 8 different states of meditation you can be in, where the first 4 are like the main ones that you use for meditative practice, where you're aware of your body, but your mind has become very quiet. And the first jhana contains a lot of different factors in it. And as you move up to the 4th jhana, your mind progressively becomes quieter, and your body becomes more it starts out being very blissful, and actually, as you go into the second and third jhana, the pleasurable experiences increase because they become the main focus of the experience. But as they fade away and as you let go of them, you enter into the fourth jhana, where all the feelings you have are purely neutral, and they're pure equanimity. And yeah, I think that's the state where you can really do the most purification of your body, of your mind, of your way of interacting with the world, because you're essentially being supported by the lower jhanas, where if you fall down from the fourth jhana into a lower state, where you fall is into the bliss and joy of the third jhana, or down into the second jhana or the first. And it's like you have it almost feels like a pyramid, kind of like a stacked building that is supporting you and allowing you to stay in this state in a very stable, just a very stable concentration, very stable mind, where you feel very okay with what's going on, very okay with things that you might not feel okay with in a normal state of consciousness. And that sounds a little funny that I say it like that, but the point is that you kind of can use it to deal with trauma and deal with physical pain, because there's plenty of people who have like chronic pain or chronic anxiety, mental pain. And the fourth jhana, and any of the jhanas, is essentially an antidote to that type of thing. And I think it is worth kind of talking about the other side of this, which I think when I said that about it, you being okay with everything, the meditator being okay with things, does make me think that there is value in addressing like the shadow side of these things, because the jhanas do place you in a very malleable state of mind, and it kind of runs the risk of making you impressionable to beliefs. And I think that is, I have a lot of faith in the kind of like the Buddhist community, but there's kind of more like fringe Buddhism, like fringe yoga, Hinduism, those sorts of things, where they might use these states as like a tool of indoctrination, in a way to make you think that you have this like special power, because the jhanas are something that everybody has the ability to access, and there's different things that you can use to let you access them faster. And it's easy to, I don't want to say easy, but it's like always a possibility to kind of be tricked into thinking that like one group or one, like a guru or like a master or something is like the only source of this thing. Because like if they give you like a mantra or like a mandala to stare at or some type of thing like that, you can maybe use that to get into jhana very easily. But when you are fully concentrated, when your mind is fully concentrated on something, the thing you're concentrated on becomes very important. And so if someone else has their own ideology that they've put into that object, it starts to matter a lot. So I guess I'll just say be wary of practices that are very complicated and tell you to chant a certain word when you're meditating, or to view a certain thing a certain way, which Buddhism does to some degree. Well, they'll talk about like, look at this thing and think about this quality of it. And I think it is useful on some level, but really the best way to do these practices is to form your own ideas about it, and to really keep your mind, keep your ideas coming from within, rather than trying to reference something outside of yourself. And this keeps you safe from just influences that you don't want in your mind, essentially. But more importantly, it actually makes your concentration better when you're the one thinking about how to do it. And like when you actually understand how the jhana works, like how your mind is working. Because using someone else's teachings is only going to get you so far. You actually have to you know, like the people say, like, you can be shown the path. Like, I can tell you about these jhanas. I can tell you how I've been able to meditate and find these things. But someone who wants to find these for themselves, find this for themselves, needs to actually, like, form their own understanding and form uh, their own model of it within their normal base consciousness, and form their own way to get to it. Because other people's ways are always going to be limited, and are always going to require some type of circumstance or condition for them to work. But when you know how to do it yourself, you can do it anytime, and use it for any means, anything that you need to deal with, anything you need to like heal from, or just anything. They're a very, very all-purpose tool, and very when done properly and done in a setting where when done in a safe setting and with enough experience, they are like the safest state of mind to be in. But like anything that is, you know, delving into the deeper parts of your biology, of your like neurokinetics, that's not the right word. Kind of like the neural biology and the way that your mind works on like a very deep level. It's always going to run risks. There's always going to be risks involved, and it's always going to be more complicated than you expect it to be. But yeah, if you've gotten this far into the video, this is definitely the longest video I've made. If you watched all of this, thank you very much, and I hope that you, being interested in this, attain your own jhanas, find your own way to them. But yeah. But thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed, and peace.